Hello, everyone. My name is Sophia. I was born and raised in Maryland, a peaceful land with tree-lined streets and long rows of houses. I spent most of my childhood there with my parents. My mother was a gentle woman who always smiled at me, from the early morning when she prepared breakfast until nightfall in our small kitchen. She loved my father, a man of few words but great responsibility who worked hard to care for the family. We lived in a small, simple house, but it was full of love. Everything in my memory was perfect, or at least I thought so. But when I was only 15, my world suddenly collapsed. My mother passed away after a short and sudden illness, so quickly that I didn't even understand what was happening. The feeling of emptiness grew as I watched my father become lonely in a house that had once been filled with laughter. We continued to live, but we were no longer the family we had been. Every morning I went to school and every night I came home. The kitchen was still the same, the meals still simple, but my mother was no longer there. Every meal now had only two people. The distance between my father and me seemed wider than the space of our house. Then, when I turned 18, my father remarried. It came as a shock, even though deep down I knew he deserved to be happy again. His new wife, my stepmother, was a gentle and kind woman. She brought with her a son, Ethan, who was a year younger than me. At first, it felt strange, as if my life had been turned upside down again. Things were no longer the peaceful routine I had known. At first, I always felt awkward, trying to fit in with this new, younger brother. Even though Ethan never did anything to make me uncomfortable, he was quiet, and perhaps, like me, was learning to adjust to the new situation. In the evenings, the whole family would gather in the living room. Dad and my stepmother would sit together, chatting about work or future plans, while Ethan and I would glance at each other with slight confusion. It was enough to make me lower my head immediately. Family meals were the same, gradually becoming an opportunity for us to get to know each other better. But in a strange way, Ethan often served me food, a small gesture that felt unusual. He was always quiet, hardly ever speaking, but sometimes he gave me longer glances than usual. I wondered if I was just being too sensitive, or if it was merely a younger brother's feelings for his new older sister. But it was undeniable that, as time passed, an underlying tension grew between us, something neither of us ever spoke about. The feelings that should have been purely sisterly seemed harder and harder to distinguish. There were moments during the day when I suddenly felt my heart race when Ethan was near, and I hated it. I hated that feeling. I hated that I had started to think of him as more than just a brother. One night, I heard light footsteps in the hallway. Ethan had sneaked into my room as usual. We would usually have a brief conversation before he returned to his own room, but this time he sat longer than usual, his eyes fixed on me, as if he wanted to say something. I didn't know how to react. The atmosphere between us felt strangely heavy. The silence stretched on. I felt confused, and before I could think more, I nodded slightly, silently inviting him to stay a little longer. We sat there in the darkness in the dim light, two strangers who were close in a way no one could explain. To be honest, I liked Ethan quite a bit. He was very handsome in a way that I couldn't help but notice. Sometimes I wondered if I should feel guilty for it, since Ethan was my brother in name after all. But those thoughts were often fleeting, ignored by more logical reasons. We lived in the same house, and it was natural to share space. We slept in separate but close rooms on the second floor, while my father and stepmother slept downstairs on the first floor. This proximity sometimes created awkward situations. Ethan and I were both at crucial stages in our lives. I was a freshman in college, and he was a senior in high school, busy preparing for his big exams. We were both trying to get used to the new rhythm of life, but the tension between us was undeniable. There were evenings after school when we sat together on the sofa in the living room, the glow of the TV softly lighting the room, but neither of us knew what to say. The feelings between Ethan and me were ambiguous, not quite the feelings of normal siblings. I realized that I liked him for real, beyond the boundaries of family love. It confused me, but I couldn't deny that every time I saw Ethan, my heart beat faster. One day, we accidentally met on the stairs. Our eyes locked, and there was something in his gaze that I couldn't ignore. It was a peaceful evening like any other, but I had a feeling it wouldn't end the same way. My parents had gone on a trip for about 5 days, leaving Ethan and me alone at home. At first, we thought it would be a time to relax, away from the supervision of adults. That night, we sat together in the living room, watching a romantic movie, one neither of us was particularly interested in, but it was something to pass the time. I prepared some dried squid, fruit, and a few cans of beer, just a little relaxation after a busy week. The movie started off easy. We were sitting around chatting like we always did, with small talk and light laughter filling the quiet of the house. But then the movie came to an unexpected scene, a scene of a couple passionately embracing each other. I don't know why, but we both fell silent. There was no more laughter, no more carefree conversation. The space between Ethan and me suddenly became stuffy, no longer the comfort of two siblings sharing a simple moment. I could feel Ethan's eyes on me, but it was no longer the usual gaze. A hot feeling began to spread through my body, but I said nothing. I just sat there, holding the beer can in my hand, trying to keep calm. Before I could understand what was happening, Ethan embraced me. His movements were strong, unexpected, and irresistible. His kisses were urgent, as if all the emotions that had been suppressed for so long suddenly exploded. I couldn't resist. My heart was in turmoil, but my body reacted in a completely different way. We had crossed the boundaries of sisterly affection, right there in the darkness of that quiet room. That night was no longer just another night. It marked a major turning point, a change I knew would never be the same again. That night, all boundaries were broken. I couldn't deny that I had let my emotions take over, letting what should never have happened happen. The entire night, Ethan and I were together completely, crossing all the lines that should have never been crossed. We didn't say much. Everything seemed to happen instinctively, as if we were both giving in to emotions that had been suppressed for so long. The closeness we had once tried to maintain was gone, replaced by emotions we couldn't control. I remember very clearly the feeling the next morning as the gentle sunlight filtered through the curtains. I lay there beside Ethan, in the room that was supposed to be my peaceful place to sleep. Everything around me was the same as any other day. The room was quiet, the light warm, but inside me, something had completely changed. We didn't say much. We just silently looked at each other for a moment, and perhaps in that moment, we both understood that from this point on, our lives would never be the same. In the following days, my father and stepmother were still traveling, and we continued to make the most of that time. There was no longer any feeling of awkwardness, but instead, a contradictory comfort. We lived as if we were two people in love, free from the prying eyes of others. Meals were no longer family meals, but private moments. Just me and Ethan. Every night, we sat together, watched movies, talked, and ended the night in the same bed. During those days, I let myself forget reality. I forgot that Ethan and I were only siblings in name. We lived those days as if we were a young, free couple without any worries. Everything happened so naturally, so easily, that I couldn't stop. I couldn't escape the feeling of being swept away by our secret love and long nights together. Then came the day when my parents returned. When they entered the house, everything returned to normal. Ethan and I resumed our roles as siblings under one roof. We acted as if nothing had happened, as if every intimate moment had been nothing but a fleeting dream. My parents didn't notice. They kept smiling, chatting about their travels, while Ethan and I sat there silently, sharing glances, knowing that our secret would have to be kept forever. In the months that followed, we continued to see each other in secret. The sneaky meetings, the long sleepless nights, became a habit. Whenever my parents went to bed early or had to go out, Ethan would sneak into my room, and we would cling to each other as if there had never been any barrier between us. During the day, we tried to act normal. Family meals continued as usual, and my parents didn't suspect anything. Ethan and I exchanged only brief moments, hidden glances, and silent communication, carrying a tension that made me feel short of breath. But at the same time, I couldn't stop. The guilt slowly gnawed at me, but it wasn't strong enough to make me give up. I continued to live in secrecy. Every night, every moment with Ethan became so familiar that I feared I wouldn't be able to escape. I knew I couldn't let this go any further, so I started taking birth control pills quietly and carefully, without anyone knowing. I feared the consequences of this relationship, but instead of stopping, I chose to control it. I convinced myself that everything was still within reach, that we would never be discovered. I tried to convince myself that everything was still within reach, that we would never, ever be discovered. About a year later, Ethan graduated and went to college. He had to leave home, moving to another city to continue his education. When Ethan left, I knew that our relationship would change, even though I didn't want to admit it. The distance between us made things harder. No more sneaky nights. No more quiet moments together. The distance forced us to put our relationship on hold, even though I still felt heavy with nostalgia for the past. After graduating, I decided to find a new path for myself. I applied for a job as an office worker for a digital company. The job wasn't anything special, but it gave me stability, away from the days of conflict and emotional turmoil. That's when I met him, the man who changed my life forever. He's the owner of a fairly large hair salon in the city, a calm, confident, and charming man. From the first meeting, I was impressed by his strength and gentleness. He was unlike anyone I had ever met before. Every story, every look he gave me made me feel safe, something I had never felt in all these years. We fell in love quickly. Everything happened naturally, as if we were destined to find each other. Not long after, we got married and began building the family life I had always dreamed of. Now we have a child together, and life is more complete than ever. The days with him and our child make me temporarily forget the painful memories of the past, although sometimes they still come back to haunt me in moments of weakness. I knew I had found a new home, a man worthy of love and respect. But somewhere in my mind, the memory of Ethan and those secret days had not completely disappeared. I wondered if I would ever truly forget it all. But now I have a family to protect, and that's what matters most. Yet, a deep part of me still feels guilty towards my husband. He is a wonderful man, always showing me genuine care and love. But every time I look into his eyes, I feel a weight on my heart, as if I'm hiding a part of my past that he should have known. I don't know if I should tell him about my past with Ethan. Sometimes, the thought keeps me up at night, torn between telling him everything or keeping this secret forever. I'm afraid that if I confess, he'll never look at me the same way again. Everything we've built, the little family I cherish, could crumble because of a confession. But on the other hand, continuing to live with this secret is like a rock weighing down on me every day. It makes me feel like I don't deserve the love he has for me. Honestly, I don't know what to do. I'm at a crossroads, not sure which path is right. Perhaps when you hear my story, you will criticize me for hurting many people, for making wrong decisions in the past. But I can only ask you, if you were in my situation, what would you do? Would you choose to confess the truth, knowing that it might break everything? Or would you choose to keep silent, letting the past sink deep into your memory, hoping it will never come back to hurt the people you love? I hope to receive your advice in the comment section below. If you were in my situation, what would you do? Should I confess everything and face the consequences, or keep this secret to myself to protect what I have? I appreciate any advice, sympathy, or criticism, because really, I'm at a crossroads, not knowing which path is right.